that took some change. And that was really thinking through as a family, my wife and I, thinking through what are our values as a family, and really thinking about our sense of community that we want to pursue, our kids and their education and their opportunities career-wise. What was the ministry component I was looking for? Why was I even interested in doing research? And when I answered those questions and I thought about, a trajectory at a institution like Baylor, or starting up a brand new research center, and not being there physically, being a remote executive director, with our academic home as Wisconsin Lutheran College and our practice and administrative home being Kingdom Workers, also near Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And the travel it would cost, it was a matter of significant faith and trusting that this is more than just me. And I think if I was thinking, oh yeah, I can do this, Jason can do this, but we wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
But recognizing that, God's in this.
That is Dr. Jason Paltzer, and this is the Well Mind Podcast. Welcome to the show, friends. I'm excited to have you with me. For this conversation, I invited Jason back to the podcast to chat about all the changes that have happened for him personally and professionally over these past few years. Jason was originally on the podcast when he was at Baylor, and we discussed public health really as a pathway for ministry. Then, back in January of this year, he and I reconnected at a men's ministry conference in Phoenix, Arizona. And in that brief conversation, it was abundantly clear that I needed to have him back on the podcast. Today, in this episode, Jason and I unpack the significant, life-altering choices he made over the past years to pursue what we now know as the Meros Center. The Meros Center is a place where faith-based health organizations, researchers, and learners can find the support they need to measure, innovate, and share their impact. In our conversation, we also explore the rich and meaningful work being done through the Meros Center, both nationally and internationally. It's a far-reaching conversation on public health, the need for Christian researchers, and faith-informed research. We also discuss the need for increasing access to both trusted and reliable resources for information on health and well-being. It's certainly a joy to share my conversation with Jason in episode 43, Faith-Based Health Innovation. Well, Jason, thanks for coming back on the Well Mind Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Dr. Coles. It's great to be back and to give an update.
Yeah. So last time we chatted, it was such an interesting conversation because so many of the chats that I have with folks on the podcast are, I would say, micro level kinds of conversations, talking about something very specific to like an individual or a personal experience or something like that. But what I loved about our conversation was how broad in scope it was, because we were talking about public health and how, and yet still it touches the individual, obviously, but it's really looking at things from a systems perspective, a community perspective, being culturally informed. So I love that we get to have a part two, because a lot of things have changed and shifted for you since we last chatted. So would it be all right, just as we kind of step into this conversation, to just hear where life has taken you over these past few years? Because I think you were still at Baylor full time.
That's right.
When we chatted, and that you're in a very different position now.
Right. Yeah. Personally, that was a big transition, being in a great position at Baylor, working in their public health program in a good team. And yet when this opportunity came across my came across my plate to connect my research experience with my public health experience and my ministry experience. It really was a convergence of the skills and gifts God has given me. And so that was 2021, and I made the shift in June of 2021. So a few months after we spoke, and my family and I ended up moving back to Phoenix, Arizona, where we now live, from Waco. My wife was blessed to get a position as worship director at a church here in Phoenix, Crosswalk Church.
Oh, sure.
And
that's awesome.
yeah, and so it was a good opportunity for both of us, and made transitions together. And at that time, we still didn't have a name, but we did have an agreement between Wisconsin Lutheran College and Kingdom Workers, wanting to get into this space of Christian health research and training. So that was sort of the broad agenda, was coming at this from a community health, holistic health perspective, to walk alongside organizations like Kingdom Workers.
Sure.
And connect them with Christian researchers that could help them develop the evidence base for their programs. So that was sort of the broad
Right.
charge. We went and worked through several market studies, thinking about who the market would be from an organization's perspective, as well as a training perspective, and who would enroll in some of the programs that we might provide. And so finally, it was in about May of 2022 that a joint venture was signed between Wisconsin Lutheran College and Kingdom Workers to create what is now called the Meros Center.
Mm-hmm.
And the Meros Center is a research and training community for Christian health ministry.
Yeah.
It's kind of our overall focus as a center. We launched as the Meros Center in November of 2022 with
Sure.
a nice event at Wisconsin Lutheran College. So it's been about a year and a half of existence as the formal entity of the Meros Center. And it's been such a ride, such a blessing.
Yeah. No, from inception to reality, there's always a ton of work that happens before something even has a name or is visible to other people. And it's just kind of this idea that's maybe percolating between a few individuals and, or in this case, kind of a partnership between entities, but really key people, I'm sure, were involved in supporting you in this development process. But yeah, from 21 all the way to the fall of 22, I mean, there's a lot of work that's happening there. Can you talk a little bit about just what that process was like?
Absolutely, yeah. So we first started off with contracting a consultant to do a market study just in this space of what's already existing in faith-based public health and healthcare research.
Okay.
And so that was great. Just kind of digging into the literature, digging into other universities and academic research centers that are specifically focused on faith-based research and training, and coming to the conclusion that there was an opportunity for us. And there was an opportunity to really help specifically the healthcare sector think about how to integrate spirituality into their care. So that was a little bit different than what we were thinking from a public health perspective. But that was informative for us in terms of, okay, there is something here, because healthcare and public health, community health are becoming more and more interconnected, and they always were. We just, as a society, have kind of separated them, and now kind of bringing them back. And so I can share a little bit about a potential study we might do that kind of connects on the clinic community church continuum, which is kind of a really exciting space to think of how are we actually as a society connecting these three pieces of health for an individual as they're sitting in a community. So that was one market study. Then we also did more of an internal one within our core constituency of the Lutheran Church.
Okay.
And working with students and graduates from Wisconsin Lutheran College, Martin Luther College, churches and pastors, and just thinking about what kinds of training would they like to see in a center like ours. just to get an idea for topics.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great. We found really high numbers of students and graduates that might be thinking of ministry, but maybe in a different way, like more of a community-based ministry role. And this really resonated with them. And so again, we kind of saw that there was an indicator that this could be of interest to not only church leaders, but then also people that are volunteering and wanting to get better at evangelism, for example, and evangelism integrated to how they're engaging with their communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not so much as a formal degree, but as a certificate. And so that led us to making that decision of, okay, that's where we're going to start, a professional development certificate that could serve the folks that we identified in this space. And then we also worked with a marketing company to really get our messaging, because we knew something like this was not going to be easily understood. It's just not that common in our space.
Yeah.
And so that was a really great experience for us. We worked with a gentleman, Greg Marshall, and his team at CI Design in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And just the process that they worked us through. So one of the first exercises was just thinking about an image or a picture of what the Meros Center, we didn't have a name then. They helped us with the naming, but what the Meros Center would look like. And we actually came upon this idea of a village marketplace where you have individuals that have their craft, right? And they're selling their craft. They're experienced and they're knowledgeable about a particular topic. So you can think about this as sort of the group of researchers or students that have something to provide. Mm-hmm. And then you have these individuals that are coming to the market looking for something they want. And they're also finding things that they didn't realize they needed in the same marketplace. So there's this place of community. There's a place of connection. There's a place of collaboration. So you can think of those individuals coming to the market as the organizations that are looking for something that they couldn't get on their own. And so they're coming to this idea of a marketplace. That led us to the naming of the Meros Center. And the Meros itself is a Greek word, and it means that we all have a part or a portion of something. And we chose that name because we wanted to have that principle behind everything we do, that this isn't just about a researcher answering a question for a published paper.
Okay.
This is about actually changing practice and becoming better practitioners of Christian health ministry. Mm-hmm. But that takes all of us. It takes individuals from organizations, volunteers, pastors and church leaders, researchers, students, all coming together to make this happen. It takes longer, but it's also been very interesting to see how ministry is done through each and every step of the process. Relationships are being built. People are exploring their faith in different ways. Even researchers are exploring their faith in different ways as it pertains to their discipline.
Okay.
That they hadn't thought about before. And so that was a great process. It was a long process, but we landed in a very good space, I think, with having an identity, having a good base of evidence for moving forward and building out the programs that we now have.
Yeah. I love that. So it's so descriptive of the process, that this is a really process-driven organization. I think sometimes when we think about research, or we think about serving communities or people, we're very outcome focused. Like, what's the result of this research paper, or what's the result of this project that we're going to roll out in a community? But when we attend to the process, like you pointed out, there can be a sense of greater time, or that it's like, boy, this is isn't maybe moving as quickly or something. But I think when it's process driven, that shifts the focus of all the people participating in it. And like you said, there's an opportunity for growth. Specifically, you're talking about spiritual growth here, where people are thinking about their faith, thinking about Christian living, thinking about service in a way that maybe is novel for them. Right. And so when the people in the process are growing, that's going to, inevitably impact the outcome and the result. But it's really, it's just a really interesting thing to hear the process driven organization, like the culture that you're creating here.
Yeah. And actually, one of our first team members to join us is an engineer with the idea that our process is going to be very important to us, to your point. And he's been great. Rod Rosenthal's his name. And he started in December of 2022. So almost just after we launched. So he was part of that. He's been part of the building of how we do and why we do what we do, and really thinking through that from even defining the initial question, that's a process for us, in terms of what's the initial conversation that takes place. How do we land on a question that's relevant to the organization, but also important for the larger space of community health ministry that's going to inform practitioners, that there's stewardship going on at each and every level. And that's kind of how I like to think about our process and research in general, is that it's stewardship. And there's a story being told that if we don't get clear on who it is we intend to serve at each and every step, we're going to miss a more accurate story of how we're all working together in the kingdom, making a difference versus just working in silos. So again, it does take more steps. So one of the first things we do with a partner is to get a memorandum of understanding, just to help us set expectations. Like, are we both on the same page of what we have here? And once we know what we have, we also alongside it have a research agreement. So as partners, we know why we're working together, but then we also know what we're going to be doing together in the short term. God willing, it's a relationship. And that's, again, how we come into each and every one of our partnerships. It's not just about a one-off study. This isn't just a consulting contract. This is a relationship to build the kingdom, because that's what we're all about, is making disciples. And so how do we serve your leaders, your organization staff, the researchers that are coming alongside, even the student research assistants that we have working with us? Many of them are Christian. Some of them are not. And yet they're still interested in this space of spirituality and health. And so it's a great opportunity to give them a chance to just engage with this question of, how does faith and spirituality inform the decisions being made that then inform our health and well-being as an individual, but then as a community at large, or even as a church community, because we know it matters. The evidence tells it matters. Now let's dig into how and why. What are the mechanisms involved? So it's been a fun space.
Yeah, this obviously it just seems so congruent with who I know you to be, Jason, being very relationally driven, and so there was I'm sure some big steps that you and your family had to take in this process. Like you said, moving from Texas to Phoenix, and boy, that was a blessing for us to be able to reconnect this past January. I can't believe that was like 2 months ago. Man, time just flies by. But I was down in Phoenix as well for that ministry conference for men, and it was just a real blessing to see you there and catch up. But as I was saying, like to make that move from Texas to Arizona, to partner then with Wisconsin Lutheran College, which is all the way in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I mean, you kind of moved in the opposite direction of where one of those partnerships was going to be. So that inevitably meant probably quite a bit of travel for you, back and forth. I know you're pretty familiar with travel. Going to Milwaukee is probably no big deal for you. But I'm wondering kind of what has been for you, maybe some of the moments in this process where you've really had to just lean into your faith, really lean into a trust that a pathway is going to be forming through this work, and that it's going to be meaningful and purposeful.
A significant shift in my identity was stepping away from a 10-year track professor position
Yeah.
at a well-known institution that was developing in its research capacity, which is now an R1 level research university.
Mm-hmm.
A really good team, of potential research collaborations. That that took that took some change, and that was really thinking through as a family, my wife and I, thinking through what are our values as a family, and really thinking about our sense of community that that we want to pursue, um, our kids and their education and their opportunities career wise. What was the ministry component I was looking for? Why was I even interested in doing research? And when I answered those questions and I thought about, a trajectory at a institution like Baylor, or starting up a brand new research center, and not being there physically, being a remote executive director, with our academic home as Wisconsin River College, and our practice and administrative home being Kingdom Workers, also near Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And the travel it would cost, it was a matter of significant faith and trusting that this is more than just me. And I think if I was thinking, oh yeah, I can do this, Jason can do this, but we wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
But recognizing that, God's in this and he's going to make it work. And the leaders at both Wisconsin College and Kingdom Workers, Bill Meyer and John Colander at the time, kind of working through this together, had the same idea and the same belief system, and said, yeah, we can do this. The individuals that we have involved and the vision that we have for this, the physical presence, is something we can get through, with me being in Phoenix and Milwaukee. It's worked out. It's worked out well. I think my opportunity to travel from Phoenix has opened up some different doors, and partnerships here in the Southwest have happened with other institutions, working with some students at Grand Canyon University, working with some individuals at Arizona Christian University, and even some churches in this area, in addition to churches in the Midwest that want to get more involved in community health ministry. So,
no, I don't want that to be lost in this conversation, because sometimes we can think about where things are at right now. And the Meros Center, it has a name and it has employees and you're doing work and it's training, and a year and a half in, it's still in its infancy stage, I'm sure, is what it feels like for you. But it would be easy to say, and kind of miss the story of being at a pretty, a prestigious, respected university, a tenure track, position. There's a lot of outward, worldly stability that could offer. And so there's an image that I use, and maybe I'll link the image in the show notes. And I don't have it to pull up for you to look at, Jason, but it's about the disciples being out on the Sea of Galilee, and a storm blows in, and Jesus comes out and walks on the water, and invites one of his disciples out of the boat onto the water to come to him. That's a little bit of the picture that's in my head in this situation for you, Jason, because you're the professor, the researcher, you're in your ship at Baylor, right? And that's where you would think, oh, that's where stability and safety is. Or that's my refuge or something like that. And stepping out of that into the water is this whole, multi-year process at arriving at where things are at with the Meros Center. And so it takes a tremendous amount of faith to listen to that call to say, come here, step out of that worldly thing that you think provides security or purpose or whatever it is, and find that security and purpose and direction in me, right?
Yeah.
And I just don't want that to be lost on people
Yeah.
listening in this conversation, because that's such a tremendous process to go through. I don't know, does that fit at all, Jason?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it reminds me of the John Ortberg book, right? If you can't, something about you can't walk on water if you don't step out of the boat,
Mm-hmm.
and to that point of, you're not going to experience, or you can experience, but I mean, to really experience the sovereignty and the power of Jesus, it's these moments where that happens, and the moments of struggle, the moments of sacrifice,
Yeah.
And what does that look like? And it makes me think of, even when we think of our careers and we think of our jobs, and, it's easy to want to just hold on to it. Like you said, that safety and security.
Well, it's a sense of identity.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing I've learned, that, with everything, and especially our jobs, it's like just having an open hand approach. Like, God, you gave me this opportunity. I'm thankful for it, but I also know that I can give it up and it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And just coming to that reality that it wasn't about a right or wrong decision. It was about, is this a good decision for us?
Yeah.
And where we are right now, and where God has placed us, and does it allow us to lean into God's goodness in this space? And that was it was a very significant moment for our family, to kind of work through that, but then to kind of hold those things.
Yeah. No, and again, like there's nothing wrong with the boat. I mean, that provided a livelihood for those men too on the Sea of Galilee, right? I mean, and it was meaningful. They were feeding people, right? I mean, so there was good work that's happening there. And so it's never to take away from that, but it's just a recognition that sometimes we get too, like I said, a sense of identity with what we're doing, or at a certain place or a certain position or title or role that we play in life. And it's recognizing, to use your word that you were bringing up, like stewardship, like this is all God's, right?
Yep.
And it's asking those hard questions of like, well, where can I serve best right now? Where is God leading me or calling me to be able to serve, and build up the kingdom? And sometimes there isn't like you said, a right or a wrong, but there are those moments where we step out of the boat in faith and trust, knowing that there's so many things that we don't have control over, right? Yeah. And so that's just, yeah. I appreciate you being willing to kind of unpack some of that, Jason, because that's, I have a sense of what that process is like. I've gone through some of that myself personally, for sure. And so I think that's such a important narrative to be able to share as well. So I'm thinking, as you're talking and describing some of the work that is being done through the Meros Center, and this marketplace, you said it's not about being strictly a consulting group. That seemed like a really important distinction that you were trying to make, and it's about partnership and relationship. And so I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more and give us a picture of what this concept of partnership and relationship means. Maybe even like an example of something that you guys are working on right now with an organization.
Yeah. So when I think of like a consulting relationship, what's the deliverable, and let's get the deliverable done, and we're going to do it well, and we're going to do everything that we as the consulting company need to do to get it done. And when I look at our work, one of our first things that we try to do is just define what measuring excellence for the organization looks like. Already we're starting to kind of get into the space of what the organization knows that they know, what they think they know, and what they know they don't know. And that takes some vulnerability and humility on their part, to kind of just even engage in that question of, what does excellence look like for you? And how do you know, that definition? And so it takes a level of humility. It takes a level of transparency on our end. And that's one of our values is we want to be courageously transparent
Mm.
um, with what we can do and provide. I think a lot of organizations expect us, okay, what's your topic? Like, do you do substance use research? Do you do infectious disease research? And again, we're about the process. It depends on what the topic of the organization is, but we will help them define a process for which they can measure that. So, one example, we're working with an organization in South Africa, and this was one of the trips I was just on this past month, was
Oh,
visiting
awesome.
our program partner just outside of Johannesburg in a town called Middelburg, where there's a school and an organization working in community health.
Okay.
Um, but it took about a year or more just to kind of work with their leaders on what does this look like? What are we asking them for? And there was no exchange. It was just building relationships, building trust about who are we going to be working with? What
Okay.
really is the desired outcome? What we thought was a desired project, that actually didn't happen. It actually ended up moving into a completely sort of different area of their work, where there was somebody on the ground actively involved with this ministry or with the program. And it was a program working with high school students, 9th and 10th graders, in the area of sexual and reproductive health.
Okay.
And specifically, kind of HIV prevention,
Mm.
transactional sex among this group.
Okay.
Uh, and the program that they had implemented was sort of a national program, but they're a Christian organization. And so how do we bring in our Christian worldview into a program like this where we know it matters? When
Mm-hmm.
youth are making decisions about their sexual health, this has to be part of the conversation. And it was missing. And the director, Maureen, she's fantastic, was really feeling stressed about this. And so as we sort of uncovered that became our focus as a partner with them in the research side of things. They have great relationships in the community with the government and the Ministry of Health there in Middelburg.
Okay.
And so we identified a value for them was how can we increase their credibility with the Ministry of Health by showing evidence of a potentially sort of different way to do training among high school students in sexual health. So that was
That
kind of the
was
basis.
more, and that process being more integrated from a Christian worldview or integrated from a Christian values base perspective, because
That's
that was
right.
the piece that the public health product was missing.
That's right. Yep.
Got it.
And so there were some good things in that program, but number one, there was little evidence just of that program itself of its effectiveness and behavior change.
Okay.
So we kind of had that to show, well, this doesn't seem to be doing what it hopes to be doing in terms of behavior change among this age group in South Africa.
And was that because there was a lack of robust research, period, or just the effect size wasn't very large in what they had been studying? What's the story there?
Minimal studies that were done.
Okay. So
one was like a dissertation from a graduate student.
Mm-hmm.
One was more like an evaluation report on the program.
Okay.
But there was not a more in-depth, rigorous study done of is this working compared to this treatment as usual.
Yeah, right. So really just maybe a kind of promising approach, but not something with an evidence that we would call an evidence base.
Right.
Got it.
And so kind of working backward, then we said, well, how would a youth in this age group define their integration of faith with their values? And we really didn't know the answer. So that's what we spent this past the week doing when we were in South Africa, is we had workshops with the youth of this age group, talking to them about values and motivations for sexual health, to pull from them kind of what is top of mind and how are they seeing the connections between their values and what they're doing and what they're seeing their friends do in practice. Okay. We're going to work with then a team of them, of the youth in this age group, and help develop a packet of training materials that they can then deliver alongside this existing national program. And that will then form the basis of our study. But we're in this sort of defining phase right now. It's definitely qualitative research. And that's what we've realized. Our process is a mixed methods approach because in most cases, it takes this qualitative period to really define what we're trying to measure, and then move into the quantitative piece of, okay, compared to what and over what time frame do we expect to see it change? So that's where the relationship really becomes important, because this isn't just about, okay, we're going to do the qualitative piece and then call it good. This is a long-term relationship where we want to see this happen. And if it works, we're going to want to disseminate it and share it with others. And so what does that look like for you as the organization? Again, kind of getting back to the stewardship piece of what we're trying to do. So
yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, when you're talking about qualitative work, then you're speaking my language, because that, in terms of my brain as a counselor and counselor educator, I'm all about the qualitative stuff. And I do appreciate the quantitative. My brain just doesn't work that way all the time. So, but what you mean by that is this is a labor intensive, time intensive process. You're not administering just a survey. You're not gathering, large quantity of data through, paper and pencil or something. You're actually sitting with individuals. You're asking open questions, inviting them to share their beliefs, experiences, perspectives, and recording all of that, and then trying to synthesize all of that into something that where maybe some themes emerge.
Right.
Yeah. So that is a huge process.
And I also want to add that ethically, another step of all this is working with a local university or institution to get ethics approval for the work we're doing, which I think is another difference to how we're seeing our partnership as a research process versus a consulting role. That we take the steps, and like in South Africa, we have a MOU with the University of Pretoria, and we're working with a Christian researcher there who's helping guide us from the perspective of South Africa and the culture of South Africa and the social aspects of South Africa, and getting approval from that country to do research in this space, working with high school students.
Yeah.
Right. And so we take that really seriously. And if we don't have approval, there's been times where we had to delay data collection. We had people in the field. We had students in the field ready to go, but there were delays with the ethics review approval, and we had to shift gears. They ended up doing a training to train, which kind of worked out even better. And that's God again, in terms of just trust me with this. But the team ended up training a core group of volunteers in Ghana. And the volunteers were able to do great work in terms of gathering the data for us once we did get approval for that particular program. Yeah. But again, relationship building, right? Like, how can we, even if we can't collect data, how can we build relationships? Okay, let's do a training and work with them on what Qualtrics is. So they were using Qualtrics in rural areas of Ghana, working on tablets to collect data. And it was great to see. So even that kind of thing, you're building an opportunity with the survey team. And even in Guatemala, the survey team was, I didn't realize you could ask this kind of question of our program. And this was a community health evangelism program where there's health and evangelism built into the name. Yeah. And so for them to see that we could ask these kinds of questions was really kind of perspective shifting. Like, wow. And so I can ask objectively about a person's relationship with God, about their experience of forgiveness.
Yeah, that's so neat. That, and it's, again, there's so many layers here to what you're talking about that I don't want these nuanced pieces to be lost. Like in the US, we have what's called IRB, an institutional review board, and they're the ones charged with overseeing the collection of data and experimental research, especially when it comes to protected populations. And certainly high school students would be one. But thinking about traveling to a foreign country, you're not going to, approval here in the US isn't going to matter. You need to be, culturally and regionally like connected, so that you understand what the processes and ethics and rules are within that region that you're working in. And so that must be immensely challenging, because there must be a variability between these approval groups.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to know, because some of them are multi-layered. So you receive approval from the college, and then you receive approval from a national entity that kind of helps oversee the research being done, especially if it's in a particular topic like HIV, or some topic that's sensitive to the country as a whole.
Yeah.
So, but we've also found it to be a blessing, because we've developed relationships of new research scholars because of connections that the organization was able to make for us with individuals that were at institutions. And then sometimes it's been a blessing for the organization, because maybe the director or the program manager said, well, I know this person works at this university, but I never really talked to them. Okay, well, can you go talk to them? And now they formed a new relationship with them, and they have become sort of key liaisons.
Yeah.
Working in the same community because of some work that we're all doing together. Again, it's the Meros principle, right?
Yep.
We all have a role to play. And how do we make the connections and collaborations necessary to develop this evidence base? So that's been a blessing to see, as these sort of these new local relationships being forged, because of a desire to be transparent as an organization. The researcher appreciates that, the opportunity to work with a local community organization, and especially being able to bring in their faith to it. Almost every researcher we've worked with have just really appreciated the opportunity to build in their faith into some of the projects that they get to be involved in. And it looks different. Sometimes the researcher is merely a consultant to help us navigate the IRB in that country. And sometimes they become much more invested. And that's okay. That's fine.
Yeah.
But overall, it's been a blessing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just got back from a trip, you said, and that was in South Africa. Is that were you in the Middelburg area? That's so. Tell me a little bit about that trip and kind of like what that was like. Some experiences that you had while you were there.
It was great. I've been to South Africa before, but my first time in this Middelburg area. The cultural dynamics are always fascinating for me, and we're working with an organization. The umbrella organization is called Christian Outreach for Africa. They're the U.S. entity, but then the local organization is called Caring Friends, and they're the group that kind of organizes they call it the You Only Live Once curriculum. That's the name of the curriculum.
That's the state one.
That's the state one.
Yeah.
And so they help initiate that, and or at least run that at the school. It's a Christian school called St. Peter's there in Middelburg. And so we spent a week working with their students and teachers to just start the process and doing these, what we call participatory learning and action workshops. So again, it's really meant to encourage participation, encourage mutual learning within the exchange, and then acting on it. So after we've done these 4 workshops with students and 1 with teachers, we're going to take that content and work with the local program manager, Maureen, and a core group of her student leaders via Zoom, and help sort of synthesize and develop key topics that we will then create additional PLA activities around that they can use with their peers. So we're hoping and hypothesizing that by integrating this component alongside, that we're going to see a difference in behavior change in 6 months, for example. And we'll identify what those indicators are as a group, with Marie and the students. Like, what do you think is a realistic change? What do you think your peers and friends will do differently because of this? And we're going to involve them in designing the survey, in coming up with the questions. So at each part of the process, that group is going to be involved. And there's going to be some ownership on their end to executing the project in South Africa. That will start probably in September-ish. We're going to spend the next few months just kind of putting together the content.
Got it. Yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, you're involving not just the leadership or administration people there, but really the students as well.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. There's about 6 students that'll be working with us throughout the design phase.
Yeah. And again, this is just such a key piece to community-based research, is having the voices heard of the people that you're trying to serve and understand. And I think that gets missed so often because there's like a more of a top-down approach of like, well, we're going to study this and we're going to try and understand it and then we're going to apply, but rarely, having like the participant that have that active voice in the development process.
Yeah. And there's a capacity building part to this process. Again,
say more.
Yeah. So we want to publish a paper for sure, but the paper is not the end product, which means that we don't need to have the most rigorous research design out of the gate. We can build into it. And so if we can build the capacity of local program managers to be more research aware and building their capacity and competency to be like, okay, what's a possible research design here? How could I do this? What are things I need to be aware of? Like, we might have selection bias here. Or, we might have information bias here because we didn't have all the surveys completed fully, right? And so we might not know that until the end, but we're okay with that. Like, we're okay with that because we know as we start this relationship, there's going to be some capacity building. And we might not be able to publish that first paper, but it's still going to lead to some good signals for us to know what's the next step here. Yeah. Do we want to do that again? Do we want to do that study again, but have it be more rigorous because we did see something? And so what's sort of the next step, and again, we've had that experience both sides where on one side, the study was great and we were able to publish it. And we got a great qualitative study published on moral injury among healthcare missionaries. And the interviews went well. They were recorded. They were transcribed. There was one other study where we tried to do sort of another qualitative component and a lot of things were missed, and that's okay. And, there was selection bias in the two community groups that we selected, right? Yeah. But we recognized that. We worked with the team, and moving forward now, we know that we can get through that. So I think that's a blessing of us not being tied to having this really significant academic home where they're expecting us to publish in journals with high impact factors, where there's sort of this status for the researcher. We want to, when we do publish, we really focus on open access and practitioner based journals. Like, what are journals that practitioners are gonna identify or be able to have access to? Yeah. Because even with that, a lot of times they're not going to access the article. And so we're thinking of them, what's the other pathway? Creating video content and, creating shorts of the results so that they know what might be applicable to them and have a sort of a next pathway if they want to get to the full paper that's being published. But getting back to the capacity building piece, that this connects to our training too. And one of the things we provide for our program partners is access to our community health ministry certificate, which is all online, 6 weeks each for the 3 courses. And by the time they get through that course, that certificate, they have a better understanding of the theology of health, principles of health ministry, which includes participatory learning and action tools, and then an overview of mental health ministry. Like, what does it mean to work with people that are struggling with mental health concerns? Because as you know, that this is a global concern. If you're working with vulnerable groups, how do you just navigate those conversations, even with youth and HIV?
Yeah.
What does that look like in terms of how we navigate that and how we conduct studies with groups that are going through mental health challenges? So kind of giving them that little runway through the certificate. We have a research methods sort of primer course that we're about to launch later this year.
Okay.
And that gives them about 20 modules and some different research topics that they will also have access to.
Yeah.
So that's how we're trying to put these two pieces together of being a research and a training community that builds the capacity to do research among the practitioners we're working with.
Yeah, no, and that's phenomenal, because you're trying to meet people where they're at all along that continuum of understanding and education, competence, because I mean, like you pointed out, you could write a great article, talk about all the statistical power and p-values and all of these kind of things, and then give it to somebody, but they might not have any way of accessing that information in a usable way. It's like, okay, I don't even know what I just read. Yeah. I mean, some grad students still feel like that. They look at a research article and they're like, what is this even saying? I feel like I need to translate it. And so to be able to disseminate that valuable research-based information in an accessible way is such a challenge. I know it's a challenge in my field, and in mental health and psychology and counseling, to make those things accessible to the practitioner, but also to the public, right? Sometimes the journals, and I mean, we need, again, rigorous peer review process in those journals, but I've always said it doesn't do a lot of good to publish something in a journal that nobody's ever going to read or access, right? Or, maybe it ends up as a citation or a footnote in somebody else's presentation. I mean, it's still a contribution, but I think access is such a huge question when we're talking about research and translating that into practice.
What have you seen, Ben, in terms of how organizations are accessing evidence?
Yeah, that's such a, it's a good question. I think sometimes what ends up happening is, somebody does some work, whether that's research and then publishes an article. Maybe they write a book, but there's something, kind of tangible that's produced, but then it's kind of up to that person to go and make the rounds, right? Of personally sharing that information, and kind of getting the word out on whatever it is. And so maybe it's at a higher level, it's like at a professional conference or something where you're speaking with peers, because then they're going to take that information into their areas and hopefully use it or integrate it, bring that information to the people that they're serving. Other times it's direct to consumer. That's always something that's been in my mind as part of the podcast here, is like bringing, open access, free to consumer information that's easily accessible, because, you can just pop your earbuds in and there it is, right? But sometimes it means going out and doing presentations. Certainly within my experience, like I've tried to speak, like I just got back from CAPS, which is a Christian Association for Psychological Studies. They had their international conference in Atlanta last week. And so I presented there, talked about some of the cool things that we're doing in our mental health counseling program here at Bethany, and some of the novel ways that we're trying to approach forming community and connection in an online environment. And, our faith is a big part of that. So, but then, everything from there all the way down to speaking at churches during Bible study or something like that on the integration of mental and spiritual health and wellness, and trying to help people understand how these how these pieces fit together. Speaking, organizations like NAMI is a big one too, where it's both, professionals and, community-based members or people experiencing mental health challenges. Like everybody's in that kind of shared space and providing information that way. So I think, I think more can probably be done digitally. That's like maybe static, it's like it's online, it's available, it's open access, kind of like what you were talking about with those videos. I know there are some colleagues that I have across our profession that do different certificate trainings for organizations like Mental Health Academy or something like that, where people can sign up. There's a cost to it, but you look at it as kind of an investment of like, okay, this is an area that I want to learn more about. Kind of sounds like what you're doing with like that certificate training and those different modules. Like that's a higher level, of engagement that you're getting from people because they're making an investment, probably of resources, including their time and energy. But yeah, those are some of the things that I see in at least in my field of counseling and counselor education.
Yeah, kind of. When I reflect on what you said, it's like these spaces where there's a pushing of content, but there's also a desire for pulling it. There's this push-pull environment where you can put it out there directly and almost have something be immediately relevant for those that are listening. And kind of gets me thinking about, okay, there's the research, but then what are the tools that are coming from it? And really being intentional about the tools that are being created. And I think that's going to be a role for us too, is, okay, we're going to help develop maybe some of the theory, some of the frameworks that we're going to use to conduct the research, but then the tools that are going to come from that. And so, like the moral injury study that I just talked about earlier, the next step that I hope we can do is to create a screening tool that sending organizations can use to maybe identify some signals of where moral injury might be occurring among healthcare missionaries early in their career, and then be able to provide support as needed based on the themes that we developed. So I think, and I hope we can get to that space where we can start to promote, hey, based on this work we've done, this is something that maybe you can use.
Yeah.
Kind of have that tool available.
Well, and I think another mechanism that's really helpful is having like competencies or best practices, right? I mean, so tools are one thing for sure, but if we don't have the best practice, or the competence behind using the tool, kind of like what you were pointing out with training the researchers to be research informed and competent, right? Like I can go out and I can ask these questions, but if I don't understand some of the research ethics or processes behind that, that's going to become a limitation, or even maybe discredit some of the information that we're getting. So developing, again, based on knowledge that you're unearthing through some of these studies, to say, yeah, here are a set of best practices when work, whether that's with the HIV education work that you're doing or the moral injury work. Like those are things that I think about that are so important, because it brings some like unity or coherence to work across different domains.
I love that. And I think you're spot on. And already in some of our work, we've seen the lack of competency, or at least standards, for what does this particular program look like and mean, which gets back at stewardship. Like if we really want to be good stewards of how we are being transformational organizations, doing community health ministry and engaging communities, whether you're a church or you're a faith-based organization, we all want to be transformational in the lives of people we're connecting. But what does that mean to do that with excellence? And what's required of either the volunteers, the committees, the groups? And we've seen that we have we have programs, we have strategies, but are they being executed and implemented as expected? And what are those sort of volunteer competencies and standards? What are those program standards of what does fidelity to this program look like, right? And at least in our experience, organizations have a hard time answering that question. Even being able to define and give another organization an opportunity to replicate their model that they believe is working. We believe we're having an impact. Well, I can't necessarily show you. I can tell you stories. And I really can't tell you kind of what you would need, especially from a faith perspective. Like, okay, what are the key biblical principles that are needed for this particular program? And for the volunteers involved.
Yeah.
And I hope that's a space. I love your highlighting that, those areas of competency standards and leading to best practices in this space as a form of stewardship.
Absolutely. As you're kind of walking through some of that, it just makes me wonder, like, there's got to be like a buy-in process with this too, and understanding, like, why is this important? And I wonder how you're addressing that. Like, when an organization comes to you, again, they might be more outcome focused of like, we want to do this thing, and you're trying to peel back some of the layers and ask some of these questions about their why, or their purpose, or those kind of things. And I'm wondering how that buy-in process goes for you, or how you do that.
I love your question. In full transparency, this is one thing we're wrestling with right now.
Okay.
When we first started, we thought organizations would want to do this kind of work because, we're all about integrating faith and health. So let's develop the evidence base because we know organizations are looking for it. And if they can be part of the process and we can walk with them in that, why wouldn't they come to us and seek our partnership? But what we're finding is, number one, they're not coming to us. We're having to go to them, and we're having to kind of really sell ourselves in a way of saying, this is why we could be helpful for you. But we've also taken a step back and said, well, the reason why we think we might be helpful to them isn't necessarily their primary reason why they would initially want to work with us. And we're starting to unpack that a little bit of what is the why of an organization of wanting to get into this space. And we've uncovered some things we believe, and one is funding. Just really practical. If this work can help us get a grant or help us get other additional funding, now you're speaking my language.
Sure. Yeah, it's all about resources. In some respects, it's like it's a great idea, but unless we have the resources to do it, that's where it's going to stay.
So one thing that we're moving toward is bringing on a grant writer to help us. If we do this, we'll then help write a grant that can improve and do this better, assuming it works, right? So kind of thinking about that why. I already mentioned earlier, but external credibility. Like, how do we get credibility as an organization with the Ministry of Health or the other government entities, or even large secular entities that have some funding that we could use? Again, kind of gets back to funding. How do we get competitive for their contracts? Well, if you have evidence to show that your program works, that's going to help you get credibility with these other entities. The third area that we've also seen in this post-COVID time that we're in, I think we're post-COVID, maybe, clarity of mission has been a third area. Organizations are like, who are we now? Who are we now at this time in this space? And how our program's still relevant, right? And so we're having to spend a bit more time thinking about clarity of mission and clarity of program. Like, what really is our model now? We've done so much adjusting, and we've maintained our services, but is that where we need to be? So I guess in that way, it is, I guess, coming to full circle, process consulting in a way. Like if you want to put that consulting piece in there, it is a process consulting.
Yeah.
Listening, learning, and helping. Mark Vincent has a great book on this topic, and he's been a great friend of ours in thinking about this idea of process consulting.
Okay.
But that's kind of what we're wrestling with now as we enter our first, what we're calling baseline year. Last year was a year of experimentation.
Sure.
And kind of putting things out there and seeing how they land, seeing how they stick. And now reflecting, synthesizing, and moving forward into our real baseline year of digging into these things. But understanding the why of an organization coming to us to do faith integrated research is a key part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just have such a appreciation for that, Jason, and appreciation for how focused you are on that, because I think when we look at at least again, I'll speak from my domain. When I look at the larger profession of mental health counseling or counselor education, there are spaces where I would say, maybe lip service is paid to religiosity or spirituality as a factor in health and wellness or well-being or pathology, but it's not, it's just kind of like a checkbox almost. But what we bring when we have that deep value and place a high priority on faith formation, spiritual development, spiritual integration, a Christian worldview, like I think that is very, formative to the work that we're doing. But then it brings a greater attention to it in the larger profession when we can bring evidence into that space. And I think that's where there's been a disconnect in the past, is that, somebody coming from a Christian perspective might say, well, I'm doing this because, I see this represented biblically, or I see this, based on these faith-informed values, we're going to do it this way. But they never stop to ask the question of like, well, what impact is this having, or what's the outcome, right? There's no, to just use the word research, there's not a lot of evidence base behind it. It's conceptual, and everything has to start conceptual at some point. But until we demonstrate effectiveness through repeated processes, I don't think then the larger field is going to pay attention to it, right? And so what I'm trying to, I guess, I'll try and be succinct here, like get at is like when we bring evidence-based information from a Christian worldview perspective that's faith integrated, and even maybe more than integrated, but really informed or founded. I think that's a way of being salt and light to the world and to the larger profession.
It gives people an opportunity to think again about their identity and purpose, even if it's from a perspective of their career or their role with that organization, that secular organization. Seeing evidence and how people are responding to their faith in that way, like through a study, we've already seen it be transformative for participants.
Yeah.
Even participants that are engaging with these questions, and getting them to think again about their relationship with God as being judging and angry versus forgiving and loving. And seeing the shift in pre-post studies has been pretty amazing. But then also being able to share that with people in secular spaces, like, wow, this actually makes a difference. And there's something unique about the biblical worldview that is not just religiosity, sort of pan-religiosity. It's not just about a social contract of people with similar beliefs. There's more to it than that. And we're working on we're working on a framework of relational grace and kind of what does relational grace look like and how do people experience it if they're involved with a Christian program. We've come to see and believe that how one experiences relational grace is a biblical value and component of how we relate to God and then how we relate to others within the space of community health. And it's fascinating as you think about it. You can share something that fits a secular mold, thinking about sacrifice, thinking about forgiveness, thinking about motivations, thinking about suffering and justice.
Yeah.
But then behind it, you see law and gospel.
Mm-hmm.
You see law and gospel being integrated, interwoven throughout how we experience grace. And it's sort of this beautiful representation of how we can easily then connect it to the biblical worldview, but actually have it be forward facing in a way that's resonates with many people.
Yeah. Such good stuff, Jason. I know we're gonna have to land this plane pretty soon. We could probably go for a while, but I guess I want to pause at this point and say, so if listeners are interested in connecting with the Meros Center at some level, right? There's a continuum of engagement or learning or interaction that can happen. Where's the entry point for folks? What would you suggest?
Thanks. meroscenter.org, meroscenter.org is our website, and send it to you for the show notes.
Yeah, put it
there's opportunities there for researchers to be part of our research scholar group. We have monthly meetings called the Meros Health Research Collective, where researchers and practitioners that also have an interest in research and just want to be part of this space. It's sort of an innovation idea sharing space, and it's once a month. We'd love for you to join us. We also have student assistant, research assistant positions open, where a student wants to do a practicum or an internship. We have several projects that we use students within that space to help us with. And Alicia Courtwright is our research manager. She's fantastic. She works with all of our students. And then organizations. If organizations want to pitch an idea to us, we have a research application that they can fill out. It's just a basic application telling us about your community, about your potential study sample, about your research question, the topic you want to investigate. But then that triggers it on our end to follow up with you. And again, I'll share all those links with you. We also have a research primer. If you're just like, I'm not sure, I just want to get an idea of what this idea of integration of faith and research looks like, we have put together a research primer which discusses the evidence and some of the tools that we use for those measurements. And I'll share that with you as well.
Awesome.
Link to our certificate, our community health ministry certificate. Our next cohort starts in August 2024. We limit to 15 students to create a good cohort effect. So, that's open now. We're taking applications for that. So I'll send you.
And what are the qualifications that you would be looking for if somebody was interested in pursuing that certificate?
We prefer a high school graduation level, proficiency in English because the content is in English, although transcriptions are available in Spanish. If you want to read the transcripts, and we are also launching it in Spanish next year as a self-study component. So,
awesome.
And access to the internet and a good connection because it's all online. It's through Canvas, and you will be participating in some Zoom interactions with the instructors. So.
Yeah, got it. And if people just want to follow along with the cool work that is being done at the Meros Center, I don't know if you have any outward-facing social media that you want to plug as well.
LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook right now. Meros Center is our hashtag, and hopefully you can find us and follow us. It'd be great to have anyone that's interested in our work connected and either just following along and or participating in it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jason, it has been such a pleasure to get to visit with you again today. I'm glad that we made this happen and got connected. I look forward to future conversations with you. I feel like this is part 2 of, I don't know how many, but it's Indeed. Just been Yeah, it's been a really joyful time.
Love the conversation, Ben. Thanks for the opportunity. Blessings in your ministry as well.
Thanks. Thank you, Jason, for being such a wonderful contributor to the WellMind community. And many thanks to all of you for spending your time with us today. Please take a moment and share this episode. Word of mouth is still the best way to let people know about the WellMind. You can also support the podcast by hitting that subscribe button and offering a few kind words in a review. I have a number of links in the show notes for you to check out, so take some time and do that as well. And finally, thanks to the staff here in the Bethany Lutheran College podcast studio. Your support makes the WellMind possible. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, be well.